Hyperlight Drifter, having been inspired by dreams and nightmares alike, is an action-adventure game that explores a vast, ruined, and oddly beautiful world filled with unknown dangers. The game rekindles the style of old classic action games and has an abstract story that is told entirely through imagery. Hyperlight Drifter lets the basic combat mechanics and heavily inferred storytelling do all the talking. A first impression of Hyperlight Drifter is its brilliant pixel art showing detail in this artfully imagined world of sadness that hasn't shied away from mature themes. Hyperlight Drifter was developed and released by the independent game company Heart Machine and has a fascinating backstory. The creator of the game, Alex Preston, was born with a congenital heart condition and was inspired to create the game through living with the struggle. Creating the game was a passion project, and you can see how much love and effort was woven into it. He said that he wanted to put himself into his art and make it more personal because for him that was the most interesting art. If he did die, he wanted to have made something that he was extremely proud of. Alex was inspired to create the game around the storyline of a single character known as the Drifter, suffering from an unknown illness. Hyperlight Drifter's narrative and story is one that is completely unique. The narrative is one that is quite abstract and the storytelling is completely visual. There are no text scrolls, no conversations, no words, just image, sound effects, and music. You find yourself in this ruinous world like something terrible has happened, and the character you play has a horrible illness he is dealing with and dying from, and so he is seeking out a cure. Drifters of this world are the collectors of broken histories, lost technologies, and forgotten knowledge. The Drifter in the game is haunted by his illness and is traveling further into the lands of buried time steeped in blood and treasure, seeking a way to quiet the disease and the echoes of a violent and dark past. The story of a game is not the only important aspect of a game. The game also has to be designed well and play well. Hyperlight Drifter excelled in these elements too. The game design is beautiful and the gameplay feels classic. Hyperlight Drifter is a 2D action RPG in the vein of the best 8-bit and 16-bit classics, with modernized mechanics and designs on a much grander scale. The game's pixel aesthetic is something interesting and unique that is apparent from the beginning. Heart Machine has managed to achieve what almost no other indie dev has in its execution of this style. Hyperlight Drifter is a game that is easy to access and pick up, but difficult to master and complete. The combat and dashing around the screen is immediate and satisfying. The very limited health pool and rarity of health pickups make the battle tense and focused. There is a sense of dread that hangs over the game as the character is continually dying and will pause to collapse and cough up blood every now and again, despite anything you do, making you feel like you are fighting against an larger invisible foe. Hyperlight Drifter works very hard to use the classic mechanics to create a new and continually exciting experience, and every element of the game feels familiar, but not in a boring or trite way. As amazing as the game's narrative, game design, and gameplay are, another important element of Hyperlight Drifter that has played a huge role in its success is the game's soundtrack. The soundtrack created by Disaster Piece is said to be reason enough to play the game. This incredible and beautiful soundtrack has become available as a vinyl set that can be bought through iam8bit, bought and streamed as an album from Disaster Piece's website, as well as streamed through Spotify. Some reviews of the soundtrack were, "Composer Disaster Piece's soundtrack lends a sense of awe and scale to the world that consistently gives me chills," and "The soundtrack by Disaster Piece is every bit a match for the impressive visuals." Hyperlight Drifter, as already mentioned, was developed and released by the independent game company Heart Machine. The game was successfully crowdfunded on Kickstarter. Heart Machine's goal was $27,000, but through the support of 24,150 backers, they managed to raise $645,150. The game was first released in March 2016 on Heart Machine's website. The game could be downloaded on Microsoft Windows, Linux, and OS X versions for $19.99. Then in July 2016, PlayStation 4 and Xbox One versions were released and sold. A version for Nintendo Switch is to be released in mid-2018. IGN gave the game a 7.6 rating with the pros of combat purity, gorgeous art, and powerful audio. The game has not really been criticized, other than people complain that the story is too abstract, and has been rated as teen on PlayStation and Xbox for violence and blood. Hyperlight Drifter is a game that has been overall well received, and received the following nominations and awards. Hyperlight Drifter is a stunning game created by someone who had purpose behind everything that went into the game and all the elements of the game, the narrative, game design, gameplay, sound effects, and soundtrack combined to make Hyperlight Drifter much greater than the sum of its parts.